Hello and welcome to News Central Now. I am Adebola Adedugba. The top stories are this hour. CBN Governor Cardoso urges West Africa to unite for financial growth. Death toll rises as acting Governor Kadafo visits victims. Democratic Alliance says it has vital role to play in government of national unity. And details in a moment. We begin on a sad note where two persons have lost their lives in the early hours of Monday when a passenger bus rammed into a truck along the Shagamu-Benin Expressway. And this is just as 4 persons sustained varying degrees of injuries while 14 escaped unhurt. The spokesperson for the Traffic Compliance and Enforcement Agency, Trace Babatunde Akibi, says the accident occurred due to speeding by the bus driver. He said this led to the loss of control and eventual collision with the truck. The victims are 15 males and 5 females, with 4 injured and 2 dead. The Trace spokesperson disclosed that the remains of the dead victims were deposited at the Olabisi Onabanjo University, while the injured were taken to the same hospital for treatment. The State Specialist Hospital in Maiduguri has become a hub of activity following the arrival of more wounded individuals from Goza, where a recent bomb explosion has rocked the community. Now, medical personnel are stretched thin as they attend to the influx of patients, many of whom are in critical condition. Our correspondent, Umaru Kirawa, gives an update on the happenings in Borno State as the government paid visits to victims of this recent explosion.
This is just the arrival of more victims of the Goza bomb explosion, including children, women, and men. Crying with them are their families and loved ones here at the State Specialist Hospital, Maiduguri.
They brought that one, but there was a curfew yesterday to this effect. But as of now, I think the situation is very tense because they are just discovering some of the victims affected. As of yesterday, most of these victims were not known to be affected.
The total number of victims that have been brought to State Specialist Hospital are 42. Out of 42, 2 dead. Not within the hospital. 1 along the way when they are coming, he died. The other one they referred to UNTH. That is 2. Then presently we have 26 on admission at State Specialist Hospital, while 16 are discharged.
We can take care of most of our patients on our own, except for the consumables and other logistics. Those are going to be the challenges, even if RCRC is planning to withdraw. That means we need more of consumables and everything. But manpower-wise, though we are short in supply, that's human resource-wise, but the capacity is there to deliver.
The recent bomb explosion has left residents shaken and fearful, prompting renewed appeals to authorities for increased protection.
So we are all here to see our people. We sympathize with them. We call on the general public to continue to be vigilant and be prayerful, especially crowded areas. You know, people have started having laxity on the issue of checking, but I believe we have to now go back to the same culture of checking.
We are very appreciative and grateful to the acting governor for his prompt response. He's just coming back from Lagos, and when we went to him, he said he cannot say he will come here straightforward. And he hurriedly, organized us and also donated the cash made a cash donation of 5 million naira for the victims here. All we can say is thank you very much, and we thank the governor of Borno State. Even though he's outside, he has been calling from time to time, trying to find out how far. This is a wake-up call to all of us in Borno State. Tomorrow we are going to Goza, as he said, to see the victims and to sympathize with them. I still want to call on all our citizens. I use this medium to call on all of us to be vigilant so that we can avoid the reoccurrence of this thing that we have almost forgotten about it.
Amidst the grief and uncertainty, residents express hope that measures will be taken swiftly to prevent such tragedies from happening in the future. Some families are still anxiously waiting for the news of their loved ones, praying for their recovery amidst the ongoing chaos. In Maiduguri for News Central, Umaru Kirawa.
Let's take a pause on stories in Nigeria and cross to East Africa, where hundreds of people marched in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, on Sunday to honor those who died in the anti-government demonstrations, as President William Ruto insisted he has no blood on his hands while referring to the deaths as very unfortunate. Rights groups say at least 30 people died in protests driven by government drive to substantially raise taxes in the East African country. Ruto, in a television interview, puts that the death toll at 19, the first figures issued by the authorities, and promised a full investigation into the deaths. Largely peaceful rallies turned violent on Tuesday when lawmakers passed the deeply unpopular tax increases following pressure from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Police opened fire on protesters who stormed the Parliament complex, and a fire broke out. And to unpack this, I am joined by a senator, Senator Edwin Wentanya, who is the Secretary General of the ODM party. It's good to have you join me.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, how do you respond to the president's claim that he's not to blame for the deaths that arose from the demonstrations that happened in Kenya?
Of course, it's very unfortunate for him to say that. As you know, in Kenya, the president is the head of state and the head of government. And as one of the American presidents said, the buck stops with him. So he cannot run away from what has happened. Majority of the victims who have died in the streets have been shot by his own police. As commander-in-chief of all our defense forces, he has to take that responsibility. But of course, knowing who William Ruto is, we are never going to see him accept any responsibility for the people that he has been killed by his own police. If you saw the interview yesterday, he came across as a very, unperturbed. He was very remorseless. He looked like he didn't care so much about the lives that were lost. He didn't even know how many people died. When he was given an example of one of the young children who was shot almost 12 times, he thought the child was still alive. So it is better for you to believe what the civil society groups are telling you than for William Ruto to what Ruto is saying. He never tells the truth.
I mean, going by what the president also mentioned in his address in Kenya, he talked about property worth 2.4 billion shillings lost, office of the parliament bogged, office of Chief Justice also destroyed, and then he had no option as a case of where the demonstration was hijacked by criminals, and so he had to deploy armed forces into the streets. What do you make of his response in that regard?
Yeah, luckily for you, I am the senator of this city. I can tell you for a fact the parliament buildings has not burned. In fact, tomorrow, the Senate, where I'm a member, will continue with sittings. There was only a small section that was destroyed by fire, but that was put out. The office of the Chief Justice, he's lying. It has not been destroyed. It is still there. So for him to try and elevate the losses in terms of property above the lives that have been lost is to be callous and to be very insensitive to the families of the people who have been killed by his own police. And even in that interview, when he was asked, for instance, the question of the young person called Rex, who was the first, civilian who died in this protest last week, he was not armed. He was not looting any shop. He was not destroying anybody's property. He was shot in the leg in the streets of Nairobi by police, and he died from excessive bleeding. I was at the mortuary when the postmortem was being conducted. Rex was not a thief. He was not a destroyer of property. He was killed by the police under Ruto's command. So he cannot run away from that responsibility.
Now, let's talk about investigations. The president has assured that investigations will be thoroughly carried out to ensure those responsible are brought to book. We also understand that, some society in Kenya are raising, or even the Gen Z allegedly are raising, right now stands at 24 million shillings to help those wounded by live rounds in the course of the protest. I mean, how is that turning out?
Yeah, first of all, nobody can trust his government to undertake any objective investigations, because this is not the first time we have had deadly street protests. As you know, as a member of the ODM party and the Azimio coalition, last year we had similar protests. There were over 100 people who were killed, and up to today, there has never been any admission of liability, and the families have never seen any justice. In fact, it is us as members of the opposition who took a case before the courts, and that case is still pending, to try and get some justice for these people. Of course, the young people have been absolutely amazing. because they have said that they are self-sufficient. They don't want anybody to come there with dirty money, crying crocodile tears. They have fundraised largely on their own. They don't want any politicians' money to be able to give these heroes of theirs a decent burial and to support those who have been injured and are still in hospitals. The young people are collecting this money themselves. They are paying bills for hospitals themselves without the input of any government agency or even any political force. So even as Ruto pontificates on TV and lies to the Kenyan people, the truth of the matter is that he has not taken any responsibility. He has not offered any support or any help to the people that have been killed by his government or injured by his government. He won't even acknowledge that it happened. He's arguing with civil society groups and the families themselves about whether these people were actually harmed as a result of police action.
Let me come back to the issue of taxes. We understand protests have been happening even as far as last year in Kenya. I recall clearly last year in June, there was protests in Kenya regarding housing tax of 1.25% introduced by the government, and also VAT on fuel increased from 8% to 16%. And now we've seen protests, breaking out in Kenya, and then protests also following that for the government to step down, from the seat of power. Is it a case of the government, because according to what he said, Kenya is in debt and they need money, to raise and pay the International Monetary Fund. So is it a case peculiar, this taxation, increases in tax, to the Kenyan people? Is it peculiar to the government of William Ruto, or is it a case of, hey, the government really needs money and needs to pay back the IMF? What do you think?
Actually, it is a problem with the government of William Ruto, because we have not seen any other governments impose the sort of tax measures that we have seen in his 2 years in power. Last year, one of the issues was, as you have rightly pointed out, the taxation on fuel. And this taxation was a trigger because it started a conversation. But what we saw from his government in terms of a reaction is obstinacy. It was actually rudeness and disrespect of the Kenyan people. They refused to listen. He was going around the country telling his members of parliament that they have to pass this thing without amendment of even a comma. And that is what has essentially driven people's anger to the levels where now we are no longer talking about the finance bill and the IMF and the others. The Kenyan youth are saying they want William Ruto to vacate office as president of the republic. We have always had debt. The previous governments have managed this in various ways. Even the tax measures that he has imposed have been counterproductive. If you look at the figures in terms of actual sales of fuel after the imposition of the VAT, they have gone down, and he's being told by industry players themselves that there is an optimal level of taxation where if you pass that level, the economy simply will collapse. So it has nothing to do with this. And at the same time, Kenyans are protesting. The opulence being displayed by his government. William Ruto himself is reputed to own a belt that is worth 5 million Kenyan shillings. How do you tie 5 million shillings around your waist and call yourself a president? So the problem starts with him and ends with him. And this is why Kenyans are saying it is time for him to go home.
Let me go to another very vital aspect of this protest or demonstrations. People are calling for President William Ruto to step down, to resign. How possible is that? Or they have to vote him out in 2027, which is another Kenya election year?
Well, the ones in the streets, the people that we are speaking to, the leaders of this movement, are saying that 2027 is too far off. They want him to leave and vacate office now because they cannot continue to bear this year in, year out. In fact, if he had learned his lesson last year, he would not have made the same proposals that hurt Kenyans, and maybe he should have listened a bit more to what the people were telling him. But he has already demonstrated. Even now, nobody trusts that he has had a change of heart. He's trying to buy himself some time. Self-preservation has kicked in, and he is now trying to hoodwink these young people that is ready and willing to listen. But they can see through him because they know who he is. They know that he's somebody who cannot be trusted. So it is them saying they cannot wait until 2027. As a political leadership, we are more than happy to wait for genuine elections or general elections to be held. But the young people are impatient. They're saying it cannot wait till 2027. They want him to leave office today.
How do you think this can be addressed, the issue of lack of trust or distrust between the Kenyan people and then the government of William Ruto? How do we bridge that gap and ensure trust and peace between the government and the people?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's like in a marriage. Once that trust has been lost, how do you recover it? I mean, once you have shown to your spouse that you're somebody that is not to be trusted, I don't think that trust can ever be recovered. At least the ones that I'm speaking to. For us in the political class, we knew who William Ruto is. We know his history. His history is public knowledge. And he is not a person to be trusted. We said this even during the campaigns. But the young people who gave him a chance are now discovering this for themselves. So I don't see, speaking to these young people, how that relationship can be repaired. They have crossed the Rubicon, as they say. And this is a matter that can only be resolved by him leaving office so that these young people can find other leaders to put in place who will listen to them and respect them.
All right, thank you so much. We do hope things simmer down and the society returns to peace and normalcy once again. Thank you so much for your time on the news. Senator Edwin Sifuna, many thanks for your insight. You're live with News Central TV. Let's take a short break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying tuned. We'll now return to news in Nigeria, in Gwoza, in Borno State, where 2 more victims of the bomb attacks in Gwoza, Borno State, died while receiving treatment at the State Specialist Hospital in Maiduguri. The acting governor, Alhaji Umar Kadafo, shared this during a hospital visit on Sunday. Governor Babagana Zulum is currently in Pakistan on a business trip. Out of the 42 injured victims, 16 have been discharged and 24 remain hospitalized. The state government has covered the medical bills and is ensuring proper care. Kadafo emphasized the need to continue fighting insurgency and urged residents to stay vigilant and report suspicious activities. He was accompanied by Senate Chief Whip Senator Ali Ndume, Hamadu Jaha, and other officials. And to unpack this, I am joined by a security expert, Inko Taria Ipalibo. Good afternoon. Glad to have you join me.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
All right. The pleasure is all mine. I mean, Borno State has been at the center of insurgency for 15 years now. We have a record number of 2 million people displaced in Borno State, and also 40 people have died as a result of this. What do you make of this recent incident in Borno State?
Well, the recent suicide attack is an indication that Boko Haram has not been decimated as opined by the government. And the tactics being deployed now shows that there is an extreme radicalism that is taking place within the northeastern region, particularly among women. From the intelligence that has been gathered, several women were trained for this purpose, and they've just deployed a few of them.
Now, talking about the use of female suicide bomber, what makes it so easy to use women, which you rightly reference, when it comes to suicide bombing activities?
Well, they work on their emotions. When they are being recruited, it is easy to recruit and radicalize female women into suicide bombing. The script being played out by the terrorists is not new. They know that women are vulnerable. They know they are extremely emotional. And so it's easy to work on their psyches, easy to work on them and get them to become victims of the terrorism themselves.
But then looking at the history of insurgency in Borno State for the past 15 years, like I mentioned earlier on, would you say this event, this attack, is one the security officers saw coming, or it's caught them unaware?
It cannot catch any security agency or expert unawares, because suicide bombing is part of the tactics being deployed by terrorists. So if you are fighting terrorism, you must fight it from all fronts. You do not just focus on one aspect and assume that other tactics will not be deployed. suicide bombing has been known to be one of the tactics being deployed by terrorists. So it's not something that came unawares. This is not even the first time. We've had in Nigeria, there are more than 25 cases of suicide bombings, you know. So it's not the first time they are using this tactic.
I mean, the presence of IDP camps, internally displaced persons, which they now refer to as super camps in Borno State, has been fingered as a breeding ground for terrorists, you know, for Boko Haram elements. How true or false is this?
Well, before that information came out, most people have been observing, and then the information, as a matter of fact, it's a product of intelligence. So it's true that the super camps are breeding ground, because the security network available in those IDPs is not even sufficient to even prevent the IDP from being a soft target. Neither is it sufficient in preventing women and children from being recruited into Boko Haram terrorist group. So it is true that the super camps are breeding ground for this recruitment.
So what would be a lasting solution? How can we prevent a recurrence of attacks, suicide bombings in Borno State going forward?
Going forward, the Nigerian state should take the de-radicalization program very serious, because until the extremist group are identified and de-radicalized, you will keep having cells and pockets of regroupings and attacks like this. So the campaign for de-radicalization should go beyond being political. It should actually be implemented, you know, and it should be implemented in a way that could be monitored, you know, that the progress being made could be monitored, so that at the end of the day, if you de-radicalize this set of people, they would, in fact, as a matter of fact, be your frontline security, you know, in fighting terrorism. So, but if de-radicalization is just on the on the surface, and it's not being taken seriously, or it's not being implemented seriously, we'll keep having these things reoccurring.
We do hope things are nipped in the bud as soon as possible, but thank you so much for sharing your insight on the news. Inko Taria Upalibio, a security expert, many thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Food insecurity is on the rise in Nigeria, with millions of people struggling to access basic necessities like food. The country's food crisis is worsening, and experts warn of dire consequences for national security and economic stability. Our correspondent, Juliet Roland, compiles this report.
By 30% in the past year alone, with some states. Nigeria is facing a severe food crisis, with over 20 million people lacking access to sufficient food. The country's food insecurity rate has risen by 30% in the past year alone, with some states experiencing rates as high as 50%.
I went to buy bread, and a woman just came in. The woman requested for what? Gari and sugar. One, this woman is elderly. She's no longer a young lady. She must have children that are grown up. So she's buying gari, 1 cup of gari, 1 milk cup of gari, and sugar, 50 naira. What is that going to do for her for the night? What about the children? That is how sad the situation in this country is these days. So it's really sad. I don't know how best to advise the government to make the price stable. But as it is right now, they just need to make food available.
The crisis is attributed to a combination of factors, including conflict, climate change, poverty, and poor agricultural practices. The consequences will be severe, with food insecurity fueling social unrest, crime, and terrorism, while also exacerbating malnutrition, stunting, and mortality rates among children.
There's climate change that the entire world is dealing with, and this is not peculiar to Nigeria. There's climate change in the world, there's flooding, there's, farmers are not able to produce at optimal levels anymore. At the same time, Nigeria is now being faced with the issue of conflict. Our farmers are being displaced from their farms. So what do you expect from that scenario? Low productivity in the country.
Experts recommend a multifaceted approach to address the crisis, including increased investment in agriculture, conflict resolution, social protection programs, and climate resilience initiative. The government must also address corruption and inefficiencies in the agricultural sector to ensure food security for all Nigerians.
Farmers need to be able to access quality inputs. Secondly, they need access to the right advice. The third cardinal point is access to markets. And then fourthly, the farmers need access to credit. The government needs to step in and provide all the support that the farmers need at this time.
Nigeria's food insecurity crisis requires immediate attention and action. The government, private sector, and international community must work together to address the root causes of the crisis and ensure food security for all Nigerians.
Let's now tell you that the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Olayemi Cardoso, has called for increased regional collaboration to boost financial stability and growth in West Africa. And speaking at the 10th meeting of the College of Supervisors for Non-Bank Financial Institutions in Abuja, he emphasized the importance of unity among member states. The event, hosted by the West African Monetary Institute, focused on non-bank financial sector issues. Cardoso praised the recent adoption of the Model Act for Non-Bank Financial Institutions, marking progress towards harmonized supervision and resilience. He also addressed the impact of fintech innovations and emphasized the need for robust cybersecurity and risk-based supervision. Climate risk regulation was also highlighted as a priority. Lagos State government says it is receiving additional support from the World Health Organization, WHO, as it now battles an outbreak of cholera at the Kirikiri Prison. A statement released by the Director of Public Affairs, Tubosun Ugubanwo, on Sunday quoted the Lagos State Commissioner for Health, Akin Abayomi, saying out of an outbreak of 25 cases of severe gastroenteritis caused by cholera occurred at Kirikiri Medium Security Prison, and adds that urgent medical and environmental intervention measures have been implemented with success. The Lagos State government also announced a significant improvement in daily cholera cases from the spike reported 2 weeks ago. However, it acknowledged the evidence of ongoing low-grade community transmission because few cases are still presenting to hospitals across the state. The Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC, has said strategic action plan has been valuable in achieving success in the fight against corruption in the country. The commission, however, said it would learn from the gains and weakness of the 2019 to 2023 plan to ensure the 2024 to 2028 plan is more robust in achieving better results in monitoring, evaluation, and performance reporting. The spokesperson for ICPC, Adebola Bakari, revealed this on the sidelines of the Commission's board retreat and capacity building on monitoring and evaluation for senior management staff of the Commission, organized by Rule of Law and Anti-Corruption Nigeria in Abuja at the weekend. Bakari explains that while the Commission is saddled with the responsibility of checking corruption, monitoring performance is an important component of its new strategic action plan. You're live with News Central TV. Let's take a short break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying tuned. When I head to South Africa, where the Democratic Alliance leader, John Steenhuisen, has addressed the nation a day after the announcement of a new government, with former opposition parties getting 12 out of 32 portfolios after the ruling ANC lost its outright parliamentary majority. According to Steenhuisen, who now heads the Ministry of Agriculture, DA now has a meaningful and vital role to play in the reconstruction of the country.
When the DA said we would rescue South Africa from the doomsday scenario, we meant it. And with yesterday's formation of the new cabinet, DA voters can rest assured that we have kept our word and delivered on both elements of our strategic objectives. The sheer weight and spread of these 12 portfolios amount to a recognition that the DA now has a meaningful and vital role to play in the reconstruction.
Let's head back to Kenya, where Gen Z has dismissed talks with President William Ruto, saying his leadership cannot be trusted, citing an emerging trend of abduction, a government not in touch with the people's needs, a high cost of living and unemployment as the main reasons. In recent weeks, Kenya has witnessed an unprecedented uprising led primarily by young Kenyans for the government's failure to heed the people's will. The trigger for this revolt by Generation Z is the Parliament's approval of new taxation measures, which the youth argue are not only punitive but oppressive and exacerbate an already unbearable cost of living. Meanwhile, Kenya's cost of living has been on a relentless upward trajectory, with the prices of necessities becoming increasingly unaffordable for the average citizen. And to unpack this, I'm joined by Tele Nzomo, Program Officer, Siasa Palace. He joins us from Nairobi, Kenya. Good afternoon from here. Glad to have you join me.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we have seen in this protest is the interest of Gen Z, Generation Z. Why are they so interested and resistant, when it comes to this protest in Kenya? And why have they refused to dialogue with the President, William Ruto?
I think that the challenges we're facing as a country have been there for quite a while, and people have been speaking about them for a long time. And what happened is that people didn't listen, right? It wasn't just recent. It's not just what's happening in recent days. People have been trying to say that the cost of living has been going up. Unemployment is a big problem. The economy has been a huge issue. And this goes back to, William Ruto's predecessor's time, Uhuru Kenyatta. People have been complaining, but no one has been listening to them. When you talk about the recent finance bill that really became now the trigger for the violence, or rather not the violence, but the protests that we're seeing. During public participation, a lot of organizations, a lot of groups tried to warn Parliament that this bill was a bad idea, but they didn't listen. So the reason why a lot of people don't want to dialogue is that they have been speaking and no one has been listening. So now people are telling government, we don't want to talk to you, we want you to implement. No dialogue, just implementation.
I mean, I watched the address of the president, and then he claims he understands the concerns of Generation Z, but then the protest was hijacked by criminals. He referenced state parliaments being burnt, office of chief of staff being burnt, and property worth about 24 million shillings, destroyed in Kenya. What do you think about that statement he made?
I think the statement was a bit unfortunate. I think what has happened is that the protests largely have been very peaceful. But when you talk about violence, a big instigator of this violence has been the police, right? The police have been tear gassing peaceful protesters. As long as they see people marching, they tear gas them. Now, the moment you go down that route, you start causing, or rather, you start causing chaos. It might be that yes, in some areas there are elements of some people who want to cause trouble. One of the issues that is coming up is that there are also certain political games that are going on. There's been seems to be a falling out between the president and his deputy, and this could also be part of the reason that is causing some of that is bringing in the elements of some protesters who are causing damage. But the protesters themselves have been peaceful. I think the biggest blame here lies squarely with the police.
One of the things that President William Ruto also referenced is the need for clearing debts, in the country. The country, has a high rate of debts. I mean, they are owing the IMF. And so, more or less, it seems as though he has no choice but to increase taxes. Do you think this measure is in order?
It's not in order. I think one of the things that has happened is that since he has taken over, has debt gone up or has debt gone down? Debt has risen, right? He has increased the debt that we have in the country. Number two, our biggest problem with the economy is definitely an expenditure problem. I think I've mentioned this before on this platform. Our problem is not raising revenue; it is expenditure. We waste so much money on things that are not needed. We have a bloated government. The government, he has increased the size of the executive from his predecessor's time. He has hired more people, more advisors. He's wasted money. They are spending so much money on renovating State House, the Deputy President's house, close to over $1 billion. They're spending billions of shillings on renovations. Really, it's more of an expenditure issue. So this idea that the president needs to tax Kenyans in order to pay our debts, I don't believe it. I don't really buy into that idea.
Now let's talk solutions now. I mean, looking at this gap between the president and then the Gen Z, how can it be bridged? It seems as though, because we saw protests of them calling for him to resign, to step down. I mean, and it's looking like come 2027, the next Kenya election year, he may be voted out. So how do we resolve this issue, this gap between the president and then the Gen Z?
I think from the president's side, he needs to, as I said, it's more of an implementation matter. I think if he can start, number one, he needs to ensure that the fight against corruption is seen and is taken seriously. I think he has to make changes in government. I think there are certain cabinet secretaries that he definitely has to get rid of. He has to show that he has intentions of cutting the budget, but cutting the budget in the right area. I want to be very clear on that, cutting the budget in the right area. Let him not go and start saying he has to cut money that is going to education. He has to cut money that is going to healthcare. Let him cut budget for, I know yesterday, and I think this is a good move, he spoke about cutting the budget that is going to the office of the First Lady, the office of the spouse of the Deputy President. Those are the things that now Kenyans want to see. I think if he can show that, action, I think the pressure on him will reduce. Though I do think there are elements of people who are very keen on him leaving. But if he proves to implement, or rather to give actions that show that he's seriously listened to the Kenyan people, and we start seeing changes within the economy, I think that will reduce the pressure on him, though it will be very, very difficult for him come 2027.
Well, we hope things are resolved and then there is synergy between the president and then his people and, of course, the Gen Z. Well, thank you so much for your insights on the news. Tele Nzoma, Program Officer, Siasa Place. You joined from Nairobi, Kenya. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me again.
France's far-right National Rally, RN party, has won a resounding victory in the first round of the country's snap parliamentary election. Marine Le Pen's RN won about 34% of the vote. The left-wing New Popular Front NFP coalition looked set to seal about 29%, and President Emmanuel Macron's centrist and Ensemble alliance about 20.5%. The result put RN in the position where it may start thinking, hopefully, about forming a government. However, forces across the rest of the political spectrum have suggested that they will cooperate to block the far-right party in the second round vote on July 7th.
La démocratie a parlé et les Français ont placé le Rassemblement national et ses alliés en tête et ont pratiquement effacé le bloc macroniste.
Many poor countries in Africa face the harshest effects of climate change, severe droughts and vicious heat and dry land, but also unpredictable rain, devastating flooding. The shocks worsen conflicts and upend livelihoods because many people are farmers, and that increasingly makes them vulnerable in a warming world. And as these economic realities worsen in Nigeria and many nations in the global south turn to developmental partners like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, assisting with financing. But have these helped? Earlier, Kalu Ajar, certified financial educator, spoke to us on this development. We'll bring that sort in subsequent bulletin. President Adebola Tinubu announced plans to boost agricultural productivity and strengthen the economy through initiatives in agriculture, manufacturing and construction. And this will provide urgent economic relief for Nigerians. Dr. Femi Egbeshola, President, Association of Small Business Owners of Nigeria, shared his thoughts on what need be done for the program to have meaningful impact. In sports, Nigeria's Elizabeth Oshoba returned to the boxing ring on Sunday with a third-round knockout win against Argentina's Agustin Marisa, marking her 8th career victory. The grudge match held at the Brentwood Center in Essex, United Kingdom, and saw Oshoba dominate her opponent over 3 rounds. The knockout could have come early in the 4th round as Marisa was unable to recover. Oshoba celebrated her victory on social media, sharing the triumph with her followers. In a post-fight interview, she called out Sky Nicholson, expressing her desire for that to be her next fight, despite her undefeated 8-fight start to a professional career. A victory against Nicholson could set Oshoba up for a world title shot later in the year. The season 7 of Battle of the Ages culminated in intense boxing action at the indoor sports hall of the Nigerian Institute of Sports in Surulere on Sunday. The event featured 11 bouts, showcasing some of Nigeria's most talented boxers. The night's headline encounter saw Segun's success, Olarinwaju, defending his West African Boxing Union light heavyweight title against the reigning Nigerian light heavyweight champion, Lekan. The engine Mubiu, following the titanic battle, the 3 judges unanimously decided in favor of Mubiu, a decision that did not sit well with Olarinwaju. Mubiu, now boasting the perfect record of 15 fights, 15 wins and 14 knockouts, expressed his confidence in the judges' decision. And speaking afterwards, he set his sights on winning a world title in the near future. Spain have secured their spot in the quarterfinals of the ongoing European Championship Germany after beating Georgia 4-1 on Sunday. Now, Spain came from behind to seal the victory, having trailed 1-0 from the 18th minute through an own goal by Robin Lenormand. But the equalizer came the 39th minute through Rodri as he beat goalkeeper Georgie, who had another outstanding overall display. And playing in their first major tournament, Georgia had to soak up heavy pressure from Spain early and late faced heavy rounds to crash out of the tournament. Fabian Ruiz fired in the lead in the 51st minute, followed by Nico Williams and Dani Olmo effort as Spain set up a blockbuster quarter-final tie. And that's all on this. But before we go, let's take a look again at some of the major stories. CBN Governor Olayemi Cardoso urges West Africa to unite for financial growth. Death toll rises as acting Governor Kadafo visits victims. Democratic Alliance says it has a vital role to play in government of national unity. Send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen and follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch us live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Adebola Adedugba.